Now, thinking of how gender is developed in a person. Now, the idea of gender development was very recent. If we turn to page 27 in our book, and I will also share screen so that everyone can follow. Okay. So theories of gender development, this is of course our topic. The idea of gender as a social construct is very recent, referring to this line here. So throughout history, gender was merely associated with grammar where a word could have a masculine, feminine, or neutral inflection. It only started to move towards being a cultural construct described as acquired and developed around the 1950s. And with that, we see that the study of gender itself is a recent phenomenon. However, it is quite useful, of course, nowadays, considering that gender equality, as what we have learned last week, has been considered as a foundation for development. If every person is equal, then that would really bring about development in societies. That would be the goal or the vision. So proceeding to the topic, now in theories of gender development, we shall go through some explanations on why, as mentioned earlier, why why people generally, or how people generally learn to behave according to their gender. So as defined, as we can see here, a theory is usually understood as a hunch or a personal view that attempts to explain the goings-on of the world. Now, there will be three main theories that will be, or rather three main bodies of theories that we will study, that will explain the explanation of gender, or rather that will explain gender development. First would be biological theories, as what we can see there in the text. Second, interpersonal theories of gender development. And then third would be foundational sociological theories. So for foundational sociological theories, these explanations will try to explain the role of gender in society. For biological and interpersonal theories, it will explain the biological background of femininity and masculinity, and then the role of society or the environment to form our gender development. So I would like us to go through this lecture in a more application perspective, not really looking at this lesson as simply an academic exercise, but we would like to see how some of these explanations are observed in society and in our own personal experience with our own gender identity, how we observe others as well. So let's proceed to biological theories of gender. Now, biological theories of gender would express that females and males, of course, behave according to because of two ways, or rather two biological processes. Biology students might be able to relate to this, due to our chromosomes and our hormones. Now, for example, the XY chromosome, as what we had learned in the previous lesson last week. The XY chromosome contains genes responsible for masculine traits such as aggressiveness, competitiveness, risk-taking, among others. On the other hand, the XX chromosome. Women, on the other hand, have different chromosomal structures, and these are said to be responsible for feminine traits such as being caring and nurturing. Would you agree to that, class? Would you say that you personally, as a guy, do you have a tendency to be aggressive or to be competitive, or is it the other way around? Or are we women, do we tend to be more caring and nurturing compared to our male counterparts, no? Whether that be in school, in the family? The reason behind that is obviously because we are females and males, that our chromosomes, our biological structure that would be the reason behind these certain character traits or biological traits. The second aspect in biological theories of gender would be hormones as well. So the role of hormones in gender development. And androgen is a hormone present in both men and women. However, androgen is typically assigned as a male hormone because it is present in much higher levels in men and significantly factor in male traits such as aggression, competitiveness, spatial ability, and higher sexual drive. So, for example, in most cultures, males are more aggressive in their behavior than females. This phenomenon, according to biological views, is explained by studies linking aggressive behavior to androgen in males. On the other hand, let's look through some of these specific hormones that are inherent in every person, male and female. Well, actually, testosterone and androgen are more present in males, of course, and estrogen is primarily a female hormone. So, testosterone is a major androgen hormone in males and it is produced predominantly by males, controls the development of male sex organs, claimed to influence specific areas in brain development associated with masculinity. As mentioned, we already mentioned these traits earlier. Some studies claim that when an XX chromosome was exposed to high levels of prenatal testosterone, the female child prevalently developed into a female adult who generally did not identify with the female gender and whose sexual orientation was towards other females. So there could also be an explanation towards, this could also be a basis perhaps for, as what we can see here now, if in the case of a female, that when an XX chromosome was exposed to high levels of prenatal testosterone, if a woman is exposed to high levels of prenatal testosterone before birth, then that female child could develop into a female adult. However, they would not identify themselves with the female gender and whose sexual orientation was towards other females. This could perhaps explain homosexuality, although we are not putting any opinions about that structure in any way. This is just a manner of us studying the background behind gender development. And hormones can be an explanation towards that. Estrogen as well is primarily a female hormone, and it determines female sexual characteristics such as obviously some female organs, the same as well with males. And it is linked in the development of feminine body shapes and facial features, found to enhance feelings of intimacy, attachment, and the desire to have more children. So, if we may also just discuss transgender individuals now often also take hormones that would increase the level of some female characteristics in their bodies, as well as generally becoming or transforming into the gender that they really identify with. So that would, of course, explain as well the development of these gender traits, these traits, feminine, masculine traits among transgendered people. So proceeding to page 31, this is already page 31 of the book. There are evolutionary explanations as well to the development of gender, being that firstly, gender development is a biological approach according to the evolutionary explanation. The focal argument of the evolutionary approach is that the human brain learns. It is actually formed. So through learning, the brain evolves and gradually gains abilities that increase survival chances. According to natural selection, this is the process by which organisms that can adapt to the environment tend to survive and produce offspring. So therefore, the two sexes develop strategies in relation to their social role to ensure the survival of their species. Thus, the evolution of the prehistoric male's brain and the prehistoric female's brain favored different adaptive traits that could explain why men and women in general look, think, and behave differently. What are these traits that ensure the survival of our species? For instance, I read a book called The Science of Love class, I think that was 2 years ago, just to try to explain certain behaviors of men and women. And firstly, we may already know this, but in terms of looking for food, those are hunter traits that are still being passed down up to the present time, of course, in our species, human beings. So those traits would be accorded to guys, or males, being the breadwinner. So no wonder that structure still that is still being followed nowadays, because it is biologically ingrained in humans. And among females, on the other hand, being caring, because biologically females do have the role of giving birth. So those would be just some discussions. So how about in terms of thinking about equalizing the two genders? What if males would take the caregiving role and females would take the breadwinner role, Perhaps the reason why there is such friction towards changing that dynamic is because biologically humans have always had this norm, the norm that we have today, due to our evolutionary development. Those would be for biological traits. Are there any questions or thoughts on this matter? Okay, seeing none, let's now transition to the second explanation for gender development. And this would be, as what we can see here, interpersonal influences. So for interpersonal influences, gender development is an important topic within the academic discipline of psychology. So in psychology, psychologists would focus on how individual traits interact with the social environment to produce behavior. So looking at psychology and how we interact with others. So here are some explanations to gender development. First, interpersonal. Now, interpersonal, as what we already may get from the actual term itself, it refers to the fact that we learn how to act according to our gender due to our environment, from our parents, family, our friends, no? As well as from school, in the media as well. So take for instance, nowadays, social media. So do you believe that going through social media and the internet helps us, or rather influences us to act in a certain way? Because we see some role models from social media perhaps, no, that we follow. So that's an explanation of one aspect of interpersonal influences. How about in our school? So among our peers, growing up in elementary, in high school, hanging out with our friends, with our barkada. So among guys, for example, we of course learn how to what makes a man, no? So that would be, well, if we can refer to sports, so sports athletes, sports groups. We make friends with our teammates, and we hang out with them. And then notions of masculinity, such as being good at the sport, being excellent in a certain endeavor. What else? Being able to court a girl and actually getting that girl as your girlfriend. That would be another measure for masculinity. Some masculine traits as well, no? Such as having, it's not just for males, but also for females, having a healthy body, for example. So we learn all of these from our social network. Now, proceeding to psychodynamic theory. So the psychodynamic theory, let's just look at the actual idea. It explains that human behavior is the result of a person's unconscious psychological processes, and that adult personality is crucially shaped by childhood experiences. So this theory in interpersonal gender development is actually based on sexual development, no? Or the psychodynamic theory, of course, is based on the teachings of Sigmund Freud. So basically, in the psychodynamic theory, it posits that people develop or learn to develop according to, in terms of their gender, of course. We learn it through our own inherent unconscious psychological processes. So unconsciously, there is a dynamic that happens within people, of course, in terms of, yes, gender development. So, for example, in terms of the sexual drive or sexual activity, generally the libido is often attached to sexual drive and sexual activity. However, libido is a term that can also be equated to the energy that comes from drives or instincts that drive behavior, not just in terms of sexual activity, but also in terms of how we aim for what we want, whether that be in school, getting a good grade, in our relationships, no? So a drive is an instinctual need that compels the person to act or behave in a certain way. So Freud further differentiated two kinds of drives, the life drive and the death drive. The life drive refers to feelings of love or affection, whereas the death instinct, now, which is a call to live life to the extreme at great risk, is an example of, so the hashtag YOLO, you only live once, is a call to live life to the extreme at great risk, which is an example of the death instinct. So the death drive controls risky behavior such as aggression. So there are apparently two unconscious explanations towards why we pursue certain things, no, or why we feel aggressive towards getting certain. It's not exactly aggression per se, but just in terms of our attitudes. So with the psychodynamic theory, it explains that gender development happens according to the phases of psychosexual development, that is from birth, no, to puberty. Now, with psychosexual development, these are the phases according to Freud. In the oral stage, children usually rely on adults to feed them, and this stage is crucial in developing trust. If needs are not fulfilled, it could result to lingering issues of trust and dependency later in life. In the anal stage of psychosexual development, harsh potty training could lead to an anal retentive personality later in life who obsesses about neatness and cleanliness. Tolerant or overindulgent potty training could lead to anal explosive personalities or a tremendously messy person later in life. Lack of resolution at this stage could lead to the inability to manage finances or daily tasks later in life. The phallic stage, around 3 to 6 years old, it refers to pleasure point, where the stage wherein pleasure point is concentrated on the child's genitals, and there are different complexes that could develop. Gender development is solidified during the phallic stage around 3 to 6 years old, when the child identifies or adopts the characteristics of the same-sex parent to resolve their inner conflict. So during the phallic stage, accordingly, children would identify with their parents or with their mother or father. So in this stage, the explanation is that we learn how to act like a girl or a boy from looking at our mother or father. If a boy looks at their father, or a father figure, they would learn how to behave like a boy, and the same as well goes for girls. And then the relationship we have with the opposite parent, for example, a little girl with her father. This is actually in terms of parenthood, no, and raising a child. On that level, the parent-child relationship would be a basis for how the child would also feel, no, towards the other sex, no. So that's for the phallic stage. For the latent stage, this is the stage from 6 years old to puberty. And in this stage of psychosexual development, sexual energy is channeled to schoolwork, hobbies, and friendship. Sexual impulses are repressed. And energy is devoted to developing new skills, and play is largely with the same gender. Then from puberty onwards, this would be the genital phase. This begins at puberty, and the person, boys or girls, become sexually mature and marry someone within their age group. A relationship is heterosexual, but it also depends as well on the sexuality. Unresolved issues in the early stages that created fixations and conflict would result to sexual perversions at this stage. But please do take note that these are theories. These are not laws, not in science. In psychology, the way that we behave are sometimes referred to or related to our childhood. So if we may just refer to our own experiences, perhaps the reason why some actions that we have in terms of dating, for example, could be traced back to our childhood experiences or in our adolescent experiences in life. However, a good thing to note about psychological development would be that there's always a way to work around any insecurities that a person develops, no, that they could bring in adulthood or otherwise, because even though that sometimes we cannot control our experiences in life, but we can control how we deal with experiences. And there's always a way to navigate through these matters in order for us to create or to develop healthy relationships with others, no, and with ourselves. That would be the first interpersonal theory of gender development. It sounds a little like a biological theory, but it is under interpersonal influences, because psychology in essence is a science, of course, but psychology, it is related to how we also relate with others. The child growing up with their mother or father, that is still a social explanation or a social theory, or the psychodynamic theory tries to explain gender development through that social dynamic, at the psychological level. The second interpersonal theory we are going to learn is cognitive developmental theory. We also have we also have two more interpersonal theories. Those are socialization and social cognitive theory. So in those, so let's go through cognitive development. Cognitive developmental theory basically just stresses that a child develops an understanding of gender as he or she actively seeks information from his or her environment and organizes gathered information based still on his or her cognitive understanding of gender groups. So for example, basically cognitive developmental theory just focuses on how we organize information about how to behave, no? As a boy or girl. For instance, let's say if I may just cite an example in dating, no? So in our experiences, we often create beliefs about dating based on the cognitive information that we get from others, from books, or from our own experiences. Let's take an example of a person who wants to create a friendship with someone else. So how do you actually do that? You look for information from maybe magazines on advice on how to approach someone. No? So that is an example of gender development as well, a cognitive developmental theory wherein we try to gain information from others, or we learn from our experiences. Take for instance, in terms of, let's say, a relationship we have with someone else. So how do we make it work? We could learn from our experiences on the previous relationships that we have, and from what we learned in those previous relationships, we create a body of information that we can apply in how we behave. No? So that is on the level of our gender roles, perhaps in that interpersonal level, because as a man or as a woman, as a guy or a girl, there are some behaviors that we learn to do. For instance, like simple explanations would be, the guy is supposed to be the first one to always ask someone out, or the girl is supposed to wait. So those are information that we get from our society. That is why it is an interpersonal influence to or an interpersonal theory of gender development. So that's for the cognitive developmental theory. There are various stages of gender development. Now, the cognitive developmental theory was proposed by American psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg, and according to Lawrence Kohlberg, there are three stages in gender development. for in terms of the cognitive level. Now, in the cognitive level, first would be gender labeling and identity. Children label gender, but only based on appearance. Gender stability, gender is consistent over time, but can't generalize this to others. Appearance is still a factor in gender stability. And then gender constancy, gender is constant across time and situations. Gender appropriate behavior. So here, specific explanations about each. We can see here the child can identify the self as well as other people as a girl or a boy. This is for under gender labeling. Second stage is gender stability. The child can somewhat identify that gender stays as the person grows older. And then gender consistency, the child now has full appreciation that gender is constant through time and appearances and across situations. However, these stages can change, of course, no? Or rather, it can happen throughout life. The third interpersonal theory is socialization theory. In the socialization theory, this is in page 35, it posits that socialization is responsible for gender development and not biological influences. So basically, as what we have learned earlier, how we socialize with others is responsible for gender development and not really on biological influences. This is what the socialization theory proposes. So there are 4 potential sources of gender development in children as a result of socialization, and these are the parents, our peers. Children and people conform to what their peers expect them to behave to avoid negative reaction. Institutions, religious organizations, school, and the workplace are examples of places where gender stereotyping is propagated further as gender labels are emphasized, especially when these institutions react negatively to non-conforming behavior. A case in point would be our beliefs about marriage, or our beliefs about how to dress. No? We learn it in school, in the workplace as well. Various expectations on how to act are reinforced as well in the workplace. We experience praise if we conform to what society believes is favorable, such as beauty, such as excellence in our work. No? But we also experience rejection if we do not adhere to society's norms, such as, for example, being too aggressive for women, or for guys being too sensitive. So we learn that from from these sources: parents, peers, institutions. Self-socialization. Children learn to behave in ways that will benefit them. So a child receives positive feedback from parents when conforming to expected masculine or feminine behavior. That is the socialization theory. Basically, responding to acceptance and rejection from their social groups. Then the social cognitive theory, on the other hand, focuses more on these 3. Let's just focus on these 3 aspects: personal, behavioral, and environmental factors. Now, the social cognitive theory looks at our personal traits. So the theory claims that all 3 factors, personal, behavioral, and environmental, interact with each other. For example, children observe their surroundings and form personal beliefs based on their observations. Once we create our own personal observations of how to act in society or among our peers, then we behave in that certain way. The environment then would either accept or reject our behavior. If the behavior was accepted, then the personal belief of the child. A good example would be, let's say, in terms of, let's discuss about a gender example. No? Top of my head example would be our way of dressing. So we would believe that it would be good to, of course, it's always good to have proper etiquette, no, or proper, at least in terms of how we present ourselves to others. We have in the social cognitive theory, it explains that we initially we have an idea of how we want to appear to others, so we act out that self-expression. So if you are a guy, then you dress in a polo, in pants, and then sneakers, no? And then we behave in a certain way in public, and then when we get praised for how we dress up, so that would reinforce our belief that, okay, I would prefer to dress in this certain way because I got affirmation for how I dress now. Same as well for women and girls. So that would be the social cognitive theory. Personal, behavioral, and environmental affirmations. It is rather the same with socialization, the socialization theory. Okay, let's now proceed to foundational sociological theories. This is found on page 36. So far, we already discussed about biological and interpersonal theories of development. So for biological, we talked about the roles of hormones and chromosomes in gender development, as well as the evolutionary explanation for gender development. For interpersonal theories, we discussed about the psychodynamic theory. There were 4: psychodynamic, cognitive, developmental, socialization, and social cognitive. Then for the foundational sociological theories of development, gender roles. Now in sociological theories, we learn about the roles of men and women in society. So how society is different from the socialized experiences that we have, because society expects men to fulfill a certain role and women to fulfill a certain role too. So let's look at these theories. We have 3: the conflict perspective, structural functionalist, and symbolic interaction. So in the conflict perspective, this just basically explains that society is a stage in which struggles for power and dominance are acted out. Sociologically, in society, there will always be a situation wherein there is going to be a dominant group and a minority group. So in that sense, in this theory, it explains that women are inferior outside the home, and then we can see that domination by males requires a belief system that supports gender inequality. No? Next would be the structural functionalist perspective. This theory argues that society is made up of symbiotic parts, which contributes to the functioning of the whole society. So for this, it basically suggests that that society has different parts. So for example, we have the church and the government and the school and the economy, food sector, business. So, but in the area of gender, so different genders have various roles and parts to play in that system, no? So in that system, there are roles that are given already so that the system stays intact and there would be no chaos in the structure. So the structure is dictated already. We will just skip to the symbolic interaction perspective. It asserts that people do not respond directly to the world around them, but to the meaning they bring to it. So in this perspective, this sociological theory explains that people do not respond to the world around them, but to the meaning that they bring to it. For instance, symbols are quite important, class, now in how we try to conform to society. For example, so just going through the paragraph, this perspective also explains that gender roles are learned through socialization processes, wherein women are socialized into expressive roles. Women are traditionally socialized as nurturing and emotionally supportive, and men are socialized into instrumental roles such as task-oriented roles. Rather the same with the other explanations, but what's different about the symbolic interaction perspective is that we want to aim to become a certain ideal. So if we have an ideal mother, so we try to become that mother, or if we want to be an ideal friend, we try to become that ideal friend because of that symbol that is that we can imagine. If we prefer to be a honor student, no? But how about in the lens of gender? So we want to also be seen as that gender, no? If we are a woman, we also want to act like, to symbolize or to achieve that womanly symbol and the manly symbol. How about for the LGBT? So perhaps they themselves would also identify with the gender that they feel is representative of their true self. So if a trans woman, for example, now trans woman being that biologically male transferring to or transitioning to a woman, they are also responding to the meaning that is brought about towards what it means to be a woman. No? So they respond to the meaning that they get from the gender that they feel is more representative of their true self. So overall, those are the three sociological theories: conflict, structural functionalist, and symbolic interaction. That